Hi, everybody. My name is Brenda, and I am going to be talking not about Ada Lovelace, but just sort of starting at Ada Lovelace. It occurs to me I also completely sabotaged myself by setting up a line where John's posters were this morning. So I think a fair few number of people are out there, so hopefully nobody will mind if people come in the middle. I won't, anyway. So my talk is going to be about, I've been in the game industry, I should say, for 37 years now. I started coding when I was 11 and coded for about 15 years. I'm almost exclusively design now. Code some in Lua just by the necessity of game design. However, I do have, and have already purchased, being that I'm in my 50s, I'm starting to think about retirement, which retirement actually for two game developers just means that we are going to code what we want, when we want, make what we want, no deadlines. And we're going to do the same exact thing. We're just not going to do it with publishers. And so I've already got my retirement machines, which I'm among friends. So I think saying you have retirement machines is fine. So we got two Apple IIs, and I'm very much looking forward to finally learning 6502 assembly. So I'm sure many of you have similar weird retirement plans. Somehow, despite having gotten my start in the early 80s, I coded in assembly language for a tiny period of time, but I can't claim to have any mastery of it at all whatsoever. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of how I got into the industry. And this is, I will say it's a diversity talk. And diversity talks normally are like, oh, God. But hopefully this won't be one of those talks, and I can share a little bit of my experience, and you can see what I mean from that. So with that, I will get started. So for me, it's an amazing time to be in tech. Now, having said I've been in tech for 37 years, you would think, yeah, but there's been a lot of great times to be in tech. But now, I have never before in my career had the options that I have had. For instance, I don't know if anybody played Edith Finch. It was one of my favorite games. Absolutely loved it. I can't even imagine a game like that being made even 10 years ago, where people would say, so what's the game about? You just kind of walk around. You walk around and it's a woman's story. And if you haven't played it, you really should, because it's great. So I'm not selling it by saying you walk around. It's a beautiful game, probably my favorite game last year. And it may be my favorite game of all time, but I'm not quite ready to derail Civilization Revolution just yet. But it's up there with Civ. And so I can't even imagine games like that being made, let alone the many platforms that we have. I mean, obviously we have AR and VR, and the concept of self-driving cars. There's drones. I'm hearing people talk tons about big data, especially when it comes to games. And further out, even with games, are figuring out ways to integrate machine learning into games so that the dynamic behavior in games is actually much more influenced by the players. And how do we design machines so that they can design to the players' desires that they have to learn in the first place? So it poses some interest. I may be working myself out of a job if I succeed in doing that. But there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, and we're just, at this point, we're pressing tech further and further, and probably the craziest example of it I've seen so far is this company called Cloud Office Architecture. And they have plans to build a skyscraper, probably because of the housing prices in San Francisco. They have the desire to build a skyscraper that's going to be attached to a meteorite, and it's going to float around the Earth. And so when I think about things like this, when somebody's just like, you're going to do what with a game? I'm confident to say like games are pretty still rooted in reality. And while there's talk of machine learning and big data and all this other stuff, for me, the thing that matters most is the people who make the games. And that, for some reason, my entire career, it hasn't been so much, and I don't know how old you guys are, but for me, when I first started playing games, I would see on an Apple II something that said, programmed by Nasser. So I don't know if you guys know who Nasser Jabeli is. Have any of you heard of Final Fantasy? So here's a brief history lesson which has no slide. Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 were coded by one person who coded directly into the mini assembler and had no source code. He is a savant among savants. Square actually moved an office to California because during the whatever war it was, Nasser's Iranian, and so he was stuck in the U.S. He was afraid to leave because he was afraid he wouldn't get back in. So Square moved their office there. So for me, I've always focused on these individuals, and when I met Nasser Jabali, it was amazing. When I met Gary Gygax, who made D&D, likewise amazing. So this talk is about the individuals, whether it's lead coders or the innovators who really changed things in the first place. And so this is me. I still haven't learned to sit like a lady, as you can see. My hair spontaneously changed this color. And so when I was really young, my family would take me to yard sales. And in the States, we live in Ireland now, but in the States, they would have, I don't know whether they're called boot sales. I know in the UK, but it's basically where people put their stuff out and they have little sales of things they don't need. So my family didn't have, we were pretty poor, so we didn't have much. So my mom would give me a dime. And with a dime, you can't buy much at all. And so I would buy these games, board games, but they never had all their pieces, which I didn't care about because I just amassed this giant collection of pieces. And I'd start making my own games. And it actually got to the point, I remember when I was maybe about 10, I was still pretty young. I think I was about 10. And somebody gave me a brand new Monopoly game, which for a kid, I mean, I'm a game designer, and if somebody gave me a Monopoly game now, I'd be like, what did I do that hurt you? It's not the most fun game. But somebody gave me a brand new Monopoly game, and I was so excited to get it because this was a fresh board, right? And so I immediately took the board out and flipped it over and had an idea about what game I wanted to make, which of course is just not what the person was expecting. And then the most magical thing in my life happened when I turned 11, and it was this. My mother, who is Irish Catholic, my mother bought me Dungeons and Dragons, which was full, of course, of demons. And it is impossible to understate the effect that this game had on me. I still have my original white box, this being the white box of D&D. I still have it. And it is, I cherish it. It is beaten up because it went so many places. I went so many adventures. And when I got D&D, to me, I felt like I could finally create worlds. And so when I saw Stranger Things, it was as if somebody had actually infiltrated my life in the 80s and decided to make a big screen version of it. Because I wasn't like, nowadays, we were just talking, so there's this line, he's not in here, so I can kind of make fun of him. So John is out there, and there's a line of people who want posters signed. And it's like, I always have to think like, he's a programmer, right? And when I was growing up, and I absolutely know when John was growing up, nobody thought like, you want to stay inside on Saturdays and code? Nobody was like, cool. Nobody. It was all like, loser. So I remember feeling like I was an outsider, like I lost friends, but I was so interested in making and creating things. So by the time I'm 14, I upgrade to the Rollmaster system. And I didn't like the rules for encumbrance. So, which obviously that's not really encumbrance, but encumbrance is how much you're carrying and how that affects what you do in combat. So if you're carrying a ton, your combat, you're less likely to hit things, you're more likely to be hit. And I absolutely loved it. And I'm assuming I'm in a room with programmers, and system design is no different, so that if you change one thing, it has a tendency to break everything else. And that's what ended up happening, and it broke the whole thing, and I rewrote the entire system, and I wished I had saved it. We gave it the very humble name of Brenda Law, which is so silly, but I wish I still had it, and I don't. So by the time it's 81, I get into the game industry, and this is where I got my job, really. And I don't know what you're thinking about the various ways I may have gotten my job, but I'll tell you exactly how it happened. So I grew up in northern New York, and northern New York is, for all intents and purposes, under snowbanks most of the year. Snows a lot there. And so I also smoked, which I don't advocate doing. It's not a good path into the game industry. But I was because we couldn't smoke outside because of the snowbanks, I was in the bathroom smoking. And somebody came in and they were looking for a cigarette. And so I offered them one. They were looking specifically for a non-menthol, so I offered them one. And they asked me, just to be polite, if I had a job, and the answer was no. Had I ever heard of wizardry? Also no. Had I heard of Surtech? No. Had I heard of D&D? Yes. Not only had I heard of it, I had it right there with me because I had it in my backpack, because you never know when you have a spontaneous game breaking out. And so that's how I got my first job. I don't expect that'll work for anybody else. This was the first game I worked on. this was the state-of-the-art graphics at the time, which it really was. This was mind-blowing on an Apple II. And so my mom was super proud of me because, again, we didn't have anything. There was not a chance in hell I was going to get access to an Apple II. I mean, I've not done this math before, but our house cost, if you take the price of an Apple II then and you multiply it by 3, you have the price of our house. So as you can see, which they had purchased a number of years earlier, many years earlier. And so my mom thought I was at the forefront of tech, which I was, and I was having access to things I normally wouldn't have access to. And I fell head over heels in love with code. I started with BASIC. And if I had to do anything more than once, I would code it instead. And I remembered like the feeling I got from game pieces is the same feeling I got and still get from code, the realization that I can make anything I want. And now the thing is at this point, we have a company that can make anything we want. But still, like I have the next game that I'm working on is going to be a game that I code and that I'm confident that I can make it with the code skills that I have. And that's amazing to me, like that I can still build things like they're Legos or like they're from game parts. So by the time I get to high school, I try to convince them to offer a programming class, which thankfully they do, and I end up putting myself through college working on a bunch of different titles. And during this entire time, I never see myself, not once, as a woman in a man's world. I never woke up and said, I'm going to be a woman game designer today. Like, never had that thought. And interestingly, at the beginning of my career, I joined Surtech just after this photo was taken. So it's parity. We have 5 women, 5 men. And so this seemed really normal to me. Now I understand it's really not at all normal. But that's how I started my career, and it was that way for 20 years. And then eventually it winnows down to just me and Linda. And so I go from half to just me in much larger teams. And the thing is because it happens over time. Like it doesn't occur to me, I am as comfortable as can be working with very large teams that are all men because I'm just used to it. And I remember in 2010, I joined a company called Slide as their creative director. And they were later acquired by Google. And the company was actually majority women. And to me, when I went into a company that was majority women, it was like, this is amazing. Like, I couldn't believe, like, it was unreal to look around at all the women, like, we have a nursing room? There's a maternity policy? But so I say, like, to me, the intellectual part of my brain was like, this is fucking awesome. And then this other part of my brain was, wow, this feels super uncomfortable, right? Because I didn't really know, it wasn't bad, it's just not something that I was used to. So all this said, I still, at this point, think of myself as a game designer, and my gender has nothing to do with it. And then around 1990, and this slide is apparently what I think of 1990, I start getting asked some unique questions, and they are these. What's it like to be a female game designer? And then another one, what's it like to be a female programmer? Or what's it like to be a woman in tech? And so the interesting thing about it is it's not that there's one answer. Like there's quite a few women here. And if somebody asked me, let's just say that like, this was the one time this question's ever going to be asked. And Brenda, what's it like to be a female programmer? And I said, all of you ladies in the audience, I will take this question for all of us. And I will describe our entire experience. You'd be like, no, you won't, right? Because clearly there's not just one story, because there's many of us. So I've heard Amy Hennig, who's an absolute super rock star. She was behind a lot of the Naughty Dog success with Last of Us and Uncharted. And so if you ask Amy, she'll tell you, yeah, her career's been great. Not had any problems at all. And, she's a woman, oh, so what, right? And she's just an absolute powerhouse. And then I've heard stories of other women, and they're not so pleasant. And I was telling a story earlier. I was doing an interview about how I was told just last year, and I don't know why they decided to tell me this. Like they could have picked their audience better. That in their opinion, women just really aren't meant for code. And then they decided to cite all of these sources as if I was absent a brain. And I looked up every one of their sources and refuted every one of their sources, contacting the actual people who wrote the papers or the actual people who ran the programs. But they said that women weren't meant for code. And And that in fact, all the research had shown that, despite the fact that women invented programming. And I told him that, and he said, oh yeah, but that's it. Well, I'll show you later, it's clearly not. So I've heard stories, including just this year, of other women, so of myself. But overall, I would say I have had a fantastic experience, and I don't feel that my gender has played a huge role. Of course, I'm not going to know, right? Like, I'm not going to know if I interviewed for a job and somebody who said, I just don't think a woman's right for this job. Like, I won't know that. They're not going to call me up and say, Brenda, you didn't get this job because you're a woman. And we just don't think you're right for the... Like, nobody's going to tell me that. But at least to my face, I have not noticed much. But I did have one amazing incident. And by amazing, I mean horrific, actually. So I was talking to this guy. He wasn't actually this size. Just in case anybody is confused. But he was, as you probably know, Americans are fascinated with famous people. All right, so here's this very famous game designer. And I cannot believe that I'm talking to this guy. Like, and it's to the point that I want somebody, like, can somebody please take a photo of me just talking? Because it's like, can you believe I'm engaged? And it was an amazing, deep design discussion. And I just alternately was like, holy shit, in the conversation. And so we talked for probably, and I really admired this guy. And we talked for probably half an hour, and then he moves his coat over. And I noticed there's something there. And he asked me if I'd like to do something about it. Now, let's just remember that I've spent my life like this, just like you. There's nothing that's prepared me for this situation. Nothing at all. And so I'm very unclear what to do at this point in time. And I was surprised and I was also offended, but I have no idea how to get out of it. And the interesting thing is I don't actually, now this is a very dirty photo now, right? I mean, it's not actually, but I saw something, you go like, oh, as if, it's not a dirty photo, actually, but because of the story that I'm telling, it's probably the worst slide in the whole presentation. So I don't even actually remember how I escape. But I do get out of there, and as we're walking back through the conference, I'm thinking, like, I want to look at all the women and go, like, back away, just back away. He's absolutely loaded. He's dangerous. And I, like, quite obviously, our relationship, our friendship was done, right? And we've never talked about it since, and I avoid him at every opportunity. But that's probably the worst experience I've had. So I also have, I've had other people say to me, what would you say to other women who wanted to be in tech? And would you join our Women in Games panel? Would you be our diversity speaker? And then there's the statements that need to be debunked, like the one I said just a minute ago. And I'm sure there's random dumb things that we've all heard. And while all of these questions might seem normal enough, the interesting thing is that I noticed that everything that I was doing became much less about my work than my gender, right? So, much less about my work than my gender. And so I came up with a term for it called the female tax. And let me describe what the female tax is. So on the one hand, you could think it's extra attention, right? So that people are talking to me because I'm a woman, except nobody has ever asked John the following question. John, what's it like to develop games as a Native American? John, do you have other opinions on Cherokees looking to break into games? Nobody's ever asked him what's it like to be a man in programming. And so there's all these questions, and I might have something to say, but that's gone because people want to talk to me about my gender. And it happens to anybody, right? Anybody who's perceived as an other. And actually, a few years ago at the Oscars, they started saying, like, it would happen that when men would come up in their suits, which were also made by Gucci and Armani and whatever, they would ask them about their work and their careers, which, like, I have never busted my ass once to be a woman. I've never got out of bed in the morning and said, like, that's it. I'm gonna be a woman. But I have worked 20-hour days for days on end to ship a game that kicked ass. And when I finally go up to somebody, I don't want to, like, what's it like to ship a game as a woman? I don't know. Like, I wasn't a panda 2 weeks ago. So I don't have any idea. So they started saying, like, ask her more. And probably the craziest example with this was with Amal Clooney. So she's a human rights lawyer. And she was at the European Court of Human Rights. And she was arguing a case about the genocide of 1.5 million people, which quite obviously is a serious talk. And she was asked by a reporter when she came out who she was wearing. Right? I mean, really, like, first of all, is there anybody who wants to, like, I would just look amazing if I only had that. Nobody wants to know, and it also totally diminishes the incredibly important work this woman's doing. And imagine if they took that same time to ask her a question like this. Or when she was presenting a case on ISIS and genocide, and what does Time magazine focus on? Her baby bump. So while I say that, I'm not saying that efforts around diversity or talks like this are not important. They absolutely are. But it would be great if we didn't just have people sort of slammed onto the diversity panel or something like that. And if we focus less, say, on their gender or race or sexuality or culture, because people are more than that. And I don't need anybody to point out to me that somebody's a woman. I don't need, and Amy Hennig has never had to stand up and say, by the way, I'm a woman. I can see that. And I know she's kicking ass. And she is a role model to me because of that. So a few years ago, I decided to take my thesis a little further, and I wrote an article. I was asked to write an article about women in games, and I asked if I could take it any direction I wanted to. And they said yes. So I asked a bunch of my male friends, what's it like to be a male game designer? And these are the actual answers that I got. What? That doesn't make any sense, Brenda. And so they were absolutely perplexed. Another one of my favorites, that's a pretty niche topic there, Brenda. Although it's pretty niche, but you think about 80% of the industry is men, so it's clearly far less niche than what's it like to be a woman in tech. So I doubled down because they thought I was kidding, and I asked them this question. What advice do you have for men looking to break in tech? And these are the actual answers I got. You're being serious. Is this a joke? And so the question, and when you put it in that phrase, it sounds absurd. And it's not. Now, that's being said, do I have specific advice that I would like to give to women specifically looking to break into tech and unique challenges that they may have? Yeah, sure. But I want to be, if you've spent your entire life devoted to your work, if your work, like it does to me, feels like a calling, like I don't think I would be a good wife for anybody other than my husband. And I don't think he would be a good husband for anybody other than me, because for both of us, games are our life. I mean, our kids are game developers, for God's sakes. And so is this a joke? This is a classic slide for me behind me. Okay. But the whole focus for me is on games. And so I really started thinking about how does my gender affect games? And I came to a conclusion after much thought, which is I don't believe my reproductive organs have ever made a game design decision. To the best of my knowledge, they've never done that. I have not once said I want to grow up and make games as a woman. I've never said I want to play games as a woman, although kind of once that I did, because the first game that you could play as a woman was in 1987, and it was, of all things, of course, Leather Goddesses of Phobos. So you couldn't actually play as a woman until 87. And I started thinking, like, I don't even know really that I have any gender-based goals. Like, I've never said I want to be a superstar at giving birth. I've never said I want to have the best menopause ever. Although I'm 52 and I'm starting to think, like, well, maybe I do want to have the best menopause ever. None of those thoughts have ever occurred to me. But nonetheless, this division rears its head time and time again. So it got me thinking just in broader senses about gender-based segregation in technology. So this is a section from my CV. And if we take away all the awards that I won because 80% of the competition was eliminated, that's what you have. And I'm not saying it's not cool to win an award as a woman. It is. But it's way cooler to win an award as a person, just based on my work. Because if it's my mind versus your mind, that is, and I'm married to John Romero. I'm ferociously competitive. We both are. And so these are the things that matter. This matters more to me. And that's not to say I'm not grateful and that I don't get it, because I do. So this is a picture of my husband with a man dressed as a hot dog. And it's the only picture I have, but there's this story, like, I totally understood. It was like, God, this is exactly what it's about. So we were at QuakeCon in 2014, and John we'll say he's over here. And Hot Dog Guy, who I really wish I would have got his name, because he's going to be known as Hot Dog Guy now. Hot Dog Guy is over here. And I noticed, like, he's looking at him, and I said, did you want to meet him? And he said, no, no, he said, and I said, you're a fan of his games? And he's like, I am, but that's not it. And I said, well, he's right. Go ahead. I'll introduce you if you like. And he's like, no, I just can't. And so what what I ended up, I said, so he shares with me, he says, it was just that when I was growing up, and this kid is this man is a Mexican, and he said that when he was growing up, he could see that John was Mexican. And he knew that he was. And he knew that because John did it, and John came out of the barrio in Tucson, Arizona, he said he saw that John did it, and he knew he could do it too. And that's all it took. It didn't take John John's never given a talk about growing up in a barrio in Tucson, Arizona. But he knew that he could do it, and that meant so much to him. And I want to say that that doesn't have that same effect, but it does. So this is Gordon Ramsay, who did not grow up, surprisingly, in a barrio in Tucson, Arizona. So Gordon Ramsay, this is his flagship restaurant in London called Ramsay's. And this is Claire Smith. And she's been holding down his 3 Michelin stars for the last 10 years. And I want to say that doesn't matter at all to me, but when I ate there, I said to John, it's a 3 Michelin star restaurant, so somebody's always listening to everything you're saying. So, and the reason I say that is because they're trying to make your experience as great as possible. And I said, man, she's in the kitchen. I would just kill to meet her. And so at some point, the maitre d' came out and said, would you like to meet the chef? And you would have thought I was getting escorted backstage to meet Black Sabbath. You know, it was just like, and when I met her, I don't even know what I said. She autographed a menu for me. I was like, oh my God, right? That matters to me. And I think it matters because we all want to see somebody who's on the ladder ahead of us. You know, and this woman is at the top of her game. She's one of 100 Michelin 3-star chefs in the world, of which 3 are women. And I don't need anybody to tell me she doesn't have to say she's a woman, right? Like I always think of her just as an amazing chef. But we all need, I think, role models because their stories inspire us in any form of media. So for me, that person was my mother. Like there were no, because I got into the industry and started coding so early, I wouldn't have had any awareness. Like I didn't even know who Ada Lovelace was when I was growing up. Although I did know who Charles Babbage was, funny enough. And my mom, she was very much a woman of the 50s, and she and my father married. They settled into a normal life. This is a picture of me. Here is a little kid, and that's another picture of my dad. And so the story it ends in a kind of a weird way, not in a weird way, a bit of a sad point in the story. So my dad passes away when I was 4. Now, of course that's sad. Of course it is, but it had a profoundly unique effect in my life. And the profoundly unique effect it had was I saw a woman who did everything. I saw a woman who raised her family, put her kids through college. She was a sole breadwinner. I never saw anything other than a woman who was sort of all-powerful, who could handle it all, because she had to. She didn't have any other choice. And so the result was I never saw anything different. And I didn't think this was weird until I thought about it much later on, about this unique effect it had on me. And I'm not saying it was worth it. Right? I'm not saying that if somebody offered me the opportunity to go back in the past and have my father survive his heart attack, that I would have said, no, I like the way my life has gone. No, of course I would. And I think I probably would have been the same. My father was a World War II Marine, so I probably would have just, I don't know, I probably would have learned to fight better or something, maybe. I don't know. I think I would have been very, very similar. But anyway, the reality is that because of this, I never considered the limits of my gender. There was no women should, men should. Women were the primary breadwinners. They had careers and children. They were the strong ones. And basically, they were the best thing ever. And so I wish I could say on that it's all been rosy. But of course, it hasn't always. And in many ways, I've often felt like a pioneer. In every company I have been in, I established the maternity policy. In every company I've been in, and in many conferences I've been to, I've established, especially like really big conferences where it's tens of thousands of people, somebody's going to be nursing. So I've established a nursing room on site. And then one of the more funny incidents, I was pregnant. I was horrifically pregnant with twins, as only twin pregnancies can be. And I was out of the office for a day for appointments, and they held a meeting that day to decide how they would handle my late-stage pregnancy. I wasn't there for this meeting. And so when I found out about it, I let them know that pregnancy is not a fatal illness, right? I was expected to survive the pregnancy, in that I in fact planned things so that I would deliver the game, and then I would deliver the baby. But of course, we all know how games go, right? So in every case, I have 3 children, and in every case, I shipped the baby before the game. Babies are always on time, if there's one thing I can say. And so it wasn't until, so I mentioned Leather Goddess of Phobos. So finally we can play a female character in Leather Goddesses of Phobos. And nothing really says you don't belong like an all-male cast of characters. And I would even take this a step further. So John and I, our kids are basically every color of the brown rainbow. So we have Avalon, who's the lightest complected, and then Donovan, who's the darkest complected, and then John. And even one, I remember with Donovan, my young son, he said to me, and it was, there's no other way to say this other than swearing. It was fucking heartbreaking. I didn't use that word with him. But imagine, if you're a parent, imagine your son saying to you, Mommy, how come I can't make a character with my skin color in this game? I wanted to personally show up at the offices of the game developer and say, I demand a patch, and I demand a patch tomorrow that lets my young son make a character with his skin color in the game. That stuff doesn't happen as much anymore. But it's ridiculous that, does anybody know what the name of this is right here? It's called the Glabella. I know that because there's a game in which you can actually mod the shape of your Glabella. But yet, you can't be a female character. Seriously? So anyway, let me get back to this because that's what I'm here to do. Okay, so with Ico, Ico's a beautiful game. I don't want to trash Ico. I absolutely love it. But there's a shortage of strong female leads, and if you've ever played Ico, you kind of just drag this woman through the world. And I even think about early games that I've played. So our most iconic characters, right? She needs to be rescued, right? Like, what if it was just like, thanks so much, but I'll take care of myself. I appreciate you coming. Or if the game was a little different and she was going to rescue somebody. And if you Google game protagonist, this is the first half of the images that you get, and this is the second half. You know, this doesn't exactly, so basically white guy who shaves every other day is more or less what we're getting. And I was just not even so long ago, now before a Naughty Dog immediately stepped in, Neil Druckmann stepped in to change this, the people doing the focus tests for Last of Us weren't even including women in their focus tests. You know, and nothing is your opinion doesn't even necessarily matter, right? And Ubisoft abandoned women assassins because of the co-op because of the additional work. Now, if we take a man's body and my body, there's one significant animating difference. And this went over incredibly well, as you might imagine. So people just thought this was kind of ridiculous, and these are the cosplays that were going around for a while. And now, that said, when it comes to female characters, images like this are few and far between, but things are changing. Typically, when we see women in games, they are over-sexualized, and by over-sexualized, I mean, you know, their mouths are open, they have pouty lips. These are actually signs of sexual receptivity. And so, like, I don't know about you, but if my house is going to get broken into, I'm like, no, hold on, I've got to get my chainmail bikini because I need to take care of this. Like, nobody does this. And then this image to me is painful. Like, it's just, when I look at this, I don't think like, God damn, she's hot. I think like, oh, like just loose, oh. And often, so, and women are often portrayed like this though. And we dress them in ridiculously provocative outfits, and we demonstrate sexual arousal. Like, here's an example. These are just some examples from advertisements, game advertisements. And you know, I want to say I am by no means a prude. If you want to have a game called Sex, where the first 20 missions in the game are sex, where the objects to collect are sex, and you win sex achievements, I don't care. Knock yourself out. But what I am saying is, be aware that there's more than just people who are interested in women, and those people might want to. Those people might also, or as a woman, I may not want to go into a world and play just in a chainmail bikini. That maybe I want some badass armor too. So if we look at a couple classic male heroes, you can see that these are not at all hypersexualized, but they look like classic male heroes in games. If men in games were designed the same way women would be, and this is the best slide in the whole talk, this is what they'd look like. So I'm just going to sit on this slide because I want to. But this is what they would look like. All right, I'm going to get off. The slide is always amazing because I can see something none of you can see, right? Look at this. People, right now, women are just like, leave it up. Yeah, we'll still sit here all day, right? Where guys are like, would you please go to the next goddamn slide? All right. Okay, so, and I can always see by the looks of people just like, all right, this is a good time to look at a black wall. And so that's it. We all want heroes in games, and it is getting better. Like we have Faith in Mirror's Edge, or Ellie from Last of Us, Lilith from Borderlands, or Gone Home, like actual love stories in games. And I'm seeing, especially with the recent last couple of years, the explosion in narrative games, I'm loving how many different stories there are. So outside of the game worlds, though, we still have a ways to go. So there are literally, fortunately, millions of women in tech. We are 59% of the Silicon Valley workforce and half of the population. That said, we are less than a third of tech workers. And of those tech workers, only a fifth of us are in leadership positions. And so that's what this looks like. These are how technology decisions are being made. You may not know, I'm sure every woman knows that seatbelts were not designed on female crash test dummies. They were designed only with men. So if you've ever put a seatbelt on and you can't quite get it to go in the right place, now you know. If you ever played the original Xbox and you got what I refer to as the man hands controller, like I don't have particularly small hands yet, although I feel weird as an American talking about small hands now. Trump has ruined this for me. He's ruined many things for me, in fairness. But we've got, so the controller, it was so big that women couldn't really play it, and it was an absolute no-go in Asia. In other times, I've often felt like I struggled to have my own voice heard. So, for instance, I was releasing a game. I have been a game developer since 1981, and here's how Eurogamer announced it. Right, and I call this being wifed, and it's not like I'm wildly in love. I am a huge fan of my husband's work, but come on, give me credit in my own games. And I've enjoyed my fair share of happy internet harassment. So no, he wouldn't snap my neck, but he would teach you how to spell. And I was also at this other conference recently. This is just a couple years ago. So I'm here again, and I get wifed, which is okay. Now, but it didn't. I honestly, I didn't even notice it until somebody sent this to me. Here's what I did notice. Then it was wife Brenda's turn. With her hubby clocking up more than 35 years at the coalface of game development, it was apt her talk was about how not to burn out. I was talking about my career, and I've been in the game industry longer than my husband. But yet they assumed, without even asking, that I was talking about his career. But wait, this is my personal favorite. I recently learned about a recruiting campaign done by a company in 2011, and they were looking for programmers. And so first off, a briefcase was filled with 11K wrapped in bacon, which that looks like some pretty sick bacon, actually. So if it's 11K in a suitcase, sure, I'll take it. I'm vegetarian, but I don't care what you wrap it in. I'll take it. And then they gave you a year's supply of Dos Equis. Okay, I don't drink, but I'm sure somebody would. And then this is where it kind of got a little weird, because they also give you a custom-made tuxedo. Right, so now they're not saying they're looking just for men, and I could probably rock a tuxedo, but it gets back to this choose your character. And then they also were looking. They would give you cigars. Okay, I think both men and women can smoke. And then they also were giving you Sex Panther cologne, which is pretty sure is not a women's cologne. This is real. Then spear gun. Beard grooming oil. Now, this was where they clearly drew the lines, because if I need beard grooming oil, I'm going to do something about that. They also, just because it gets more and more ridiculous, they will have an oil painting made for you. And I noticed while I was looking through their ad campaign that this oil painting was showing up. You can see it there up in the corner. And then they have the great man spread painting of this guy. And then I also learned about a different company where if you were there for 10 years, you got a Viking sword, right? And now I want to just go work to them to get, I probably could buy a Viking sword better, but so you would get a Viking sword, unless you were a woman and you got a necklace, right? So I say this having survived 3 decades in this industry, you deserve a goddamn Viking sword as well. Like if you can make it through 10 years, you deserve a Viking sword. And I want 3 Viking swords now. And so the thing is, often when I say these things, people are like, that's absolutely, and it is, it's absolutely real. And I've heard all of these things before. The first, like, girls don't play games. And the reality is 93% of game purchases are made by women. A 43-year-old woman, do I have to stop? I'll fly through them. Okay, a 43-year-old woman is the the current average gamer. And when we take into account all games, another one I've heard is girls aren't good at IT and math. And the reality is they are, unless they're told they're not. And if they're told they're not, they will live down to that. When a major research study showed that women's code is just as good as men's code, unless their gender is known, in which case it is graded lower. And to further illustrate this point, long ago men worked on the machines, they built the machines, and women typed. And so Ada Lovelace typed, and Grace Hopper typed, she invented COBOL, and Lois Mitchell invented Fortran. Has anybody heard of the ENIAC? The first computer, it was coded by an all-female programming team, of which Kay McNulty was there. She's an Irish-speaking woman from County Donegal, where we live in Ireland now. It was an all-female programming team, and the surviving members of that coding team weren't even invited to the 50th anniversary. And there they are working there. Francis Allen invented the optimizing compiler, and I've actually said, yeah, but hardcore languages, women haven't invented those. Try again. Kathleen Booth invented assembly. And so we can think women are in the kitchen, but the reality is they're not. And we need to get more coding courses into girls' schools, and we need to tell girls that they can be just as good as anybody else, so that we can change their perceptions. And I started this by talking about Nasser Jebeli and the many other people who were important to me. And if games are the story of individuals, I want to make sure that everybody who wants to get through that door can get through it. Thank you.